But as we saw last time in Romans 13, God calls for us believers to be subject to our human government. That means we are to go as far as we can on the right road with the government until the government says, this road, I am commanding you as the government to do this, and it's against God's word. Not against our personal feelings and not against our fears of what that might cause, but when it's directly in opposition to God's word. See, Christians sometimes are trying to guess that the government's all going to become the Antichrist, so they're trying to go against anything that they think could help the Antichrist, but the Bible doesn't say this. It says you're supposed to go along with the government until they tell you to disobey God, His word, clearly stated. So we should be model citizens, and we should be obedient to all laws unless they directly go against specific scriptures that God has commanded us to obey. But we are not to be passive or idle. So keep going from Philippians, or back up, from Philippians to Ephesians chapter 5. It's just the book before. And look at verse 11. Because in Ephesians 5:11, we are to know our role while we're aliens and strangers and pilgrims on earth. We are listening to Paul, and in Ephesians 5, he's most likely writing this letter from Rome where he sat in prison. And it's interesting to think about, what does a citizen of heaven do while being subject, even to the point of being in prison, to the powers that be? Paul was so subject to the government, they jailed him, and he was in government jail. Well, in Ephesians, Paul declares our responsibility as citizens of heaven, or believers, the responsibility is that we are to be constantly exposing sin. And that concept sometimes eludes us, and we haven't thought about that. This is what he says, and have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness. And here it is, but rather expose them. Paul says, not only don't find your companionship and fellowship in all of the things involved with the unfruitful works of darkness and evil, but turn the light on and expose them. Reminds me when I used to work in the depths of the basement of the Metropolitan Opera House. Bob Jones University bought the entire Met stage and shipped it down to Greenville in the 40s and built this massive replica of that, and they had all their Shakespearean things there. And when I worked there in the 70s, I was consigned down in one of the lower 8th floors below ground getting stuff ready for the different programs. And I remember I had amused myself down there. It was like being in an old castle. I would take this big flat board, and I would come to these rooms, and I would get inside, and I'd have a guy outside because the light switches were outside, kind of European. And I would go inside, and I'd knock, and he'd turn the lights on. I'd have my eyes closed, and I'd open them real quick, and as soon as the lights came on, there would just be dozens, sometimes hundreds of cockroaches. Now, the South, they grew really big. And so I would be ready, and they'd turn the light on, and I'd go, whap, 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 whap. I'd try and kill as many of them as I could. Because as soon as the light came on, what do cockroaches do? Yeah, they don't like the light. And did you know that we are supposed to be constantly in our world turning on the light, and what that causes evil to do is to retreat often? Because those who are involved in evil don't like the light. And part of the reason that evil grows is that Christians hide their light under the what? The bushel. No, I'm going to let it shine. And we're supposed to, by letting our light shine, look at verse 11, expose evil. The responsibility of a biblical Christian is to be subject to government, Romans 13, and also to expose evil, Ephesians 5. And of all people on earth, we should have the most consistent, loving advice to people. Abstain from everything that is evil. We should have the most compelling reason. It doesn't please God. That's why we should engage our culture and point out that there are absolutes, and that God's Word says that we are to be exposing the darkness of evil around us, and especially this morning, exposing the dark evil of abortion